my name is Jaime Araujo. I'm the founder of Trois and the chair of the Napa Valley Vintners. And I am really excited about this, along with Tracy, who's my director of winemaking. We have been working on a regenerative project in one of our vineyards that we work with for about 4 years now, I think. Well,
Mhm.
we've been working on getting it going for about 5 or 6 years, but we've actually been physically doing it for about 4 years now. And very excited to have Steve Matthiasson, Natalie Winkler on this call with us as well to talk about their experiences with regenerative agriculture and some of the challenges and some of the exciting things that we've been finding. So I think what we're going to do, first of all, is just sort of let each of the people who are here with us talk a little bit about who they are, their experience with regenerative agriculture, and then we'll go into, some of the more interesting deep dive questions that I will warn you already on our prep call. We got pretty dorky. So we can get very geeky, but also we do want to be respectful of this audience. So if there are questions that we're not answering, things that you want to know, no matter what they are, please, please, please put them in the chat. And we're definitely going to try and save some time at the end for questions. So with that in mind, I will kick it over in reverse alphabetical order to Natalie Winkler.
Good morning, everyone. Natalie Winkler, viticulturist and winemaker here at Michel-Schlumberger outside of Healdsburg, California. Also co-founder of Roots Vineyard Consulting. I started working with regenerative, organic, biodynamic viticulture back in 2010. So we're coming up on 15 years of working with various vineyard sites throughout California, transitioning from conventional farming to organic, regenerative, biodynamic, a combination of those three. And the common theme that I've seen over my years transitioning different sites is that, a full transition period takes about 5 years. And that at the end, there's always an increase, a tangible increase in wine quality, which is one of the things we're going to get into today. I think one of the benefits of being somebody that makes wine and also grows grapes is that you get to see the whole process all the way through. And so you can actually at the end of the day, taste the difference in the finished product. And there's a more authentic sense of purity in the wines, a sense of place in the wines that really can't be underestimated. It's something that I think as winemakers, we're trying to always respect the site. And I think this is a way to really harness each site's potential and let it shine. So I'm very passionate about it. I'm excited to have a rigorous and spirited conversation about regenerative agriculture. And I'll kick it off to the next person, which would be Michael Tracy.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm jealous of Steve, who looks like he's in his vineyard. This is a virtual background of the Hannah vineyard behind me. Um, I'm the director of winemaking for Trois. I've been working with Jaime Araujo for about 4 years for awesome vintages. And yeah, originally I'm from Healdsburg, California, which is just over the Mayacamas in Sonoma County. I grew up on the Gallo Fry Ranch, where my mom worked in the office for about 25 years with Ernest and Julio. And so, yeah, I grew up in the vineyards. I will say a lot of my professional background has been more with, traditional farming methods. So I've been in winemaking since about 2009 or so. I've had a lot of experience in vineyards, but until my position with Jaime Araujo, it has been, more traditional styles of farming with use of pesticides, a lot of tillage. That is quite common in Sonoma County. It is common in Napa County. It's been really wonderful to see sort of the return of regenerative viticulture make its way back into the industry. I think we've been seeing a really nice appreciation for some of the original ways that we used to farm before pesticides became really commonplace. Um, and I'm excited to talk about this trial that Jamie and Araujo and I have been up to for the past 4 years with the Muir Hanna Vineyard in Oak Knoll. And I've got lots of details on that trial that we are excited to share with you. So pass it over to Steve.
Hi. Um, so let's see. Been working. These things keep evolving. You mentioned like the way things used to be done before pesticides, and I like to think that we're still evolving um, new and better because there were a lot of problems back then as well as we remember. Um, or we've heard about like the Dust Bowl, for example. And so it's a constant learning process, and that's why when we never say that we are sustainable because it's something that we're working towards. And it's something I've been in the sustainable movement for over 30 years now, along with my wife. And we kind of lost that term because a lot of people sort of thought of it as what was a process. I mean, when we were students way back when at Davis, um, the student farm's motto was towards a more sustainable future. It was an intentional. Originally, it was something that you aspired towards, and so the idea of regenerative is a really cool new evolution of the concept because it's more of a process, right? That it's the if you think about that word, regenerating is an action verb. It's something that you do actively. It's not something you say, "Yay, I'm regenerated," right? And there's no regenerated. You're just regenerating, and so it's a process moving forward, and we're just trying to get better all the time. And part of it is we learn new things. 30 years ago, we weren't talking about carbon footprint. Now we're talking about carbon footprint. Social equity conversation has changed hugely in 30 years because at that time it was all really around safety, workplace safety. Now we're thinking about opportunity, we're thinking about diversity, we're thinking about safety as a much broader definition, being safe from harassment or bullying or being safe to express who one is in the workplace. These are newer terms for the social equity. So to me, I take a very broad perspective on regenerative, and it includes carbon footprint for sure, but it also includes habitat, it includes people, it includes water usage, it includes overall resource usage. Um, it's a big concept and can get, by definition, is sort of overwhelming, and that's the beauty of it because as farmers are very comfortable, I think, being overwhelmed because the nature of farming is so complex and there's so little of it is in our control that that you part of being a farmer is just sort of navigating those waters. And so, but with the concept of regenerative are just sort of wider waters, and we have a lot of room to focus in and push forward on areas that we feel passionate about. No one's going to be able to do anything, and that's the beauty of it. But that doesn't mean that it's so nebulous that it doesn't have a core there. There's a really firm ethic behind it. I think that we can agree on, and we don't want to lose sight of that as well and let it get watered down. So it's a lifelong pursuit for all of us to be part of this sort of concept of regenerative.
Yeah. Thank you all. I mean, I think one of the things that we brought up, just kind of piggyback on what you said, Steve, was that because obviously regenerative isn't a mandated or certified process at the moment. It's a little bit like natural wine. It's like, what does that actually mean? And it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But I think one of the things that we sort of had discussed was the idea that there's a difference between practices and principles. And the practices may actually be very different depending on what kind of site you're working with. Whereas the principles, the sort of core principles, are kind of essential, fundamental, and foundational. Um, And I'd like to just go into, because we all know that there are some huge benefits to regenerative process and moving over to a more regenerative agriculture. And there are some issues with it too, right? There are some things that can happen to your yields. There are, vineyards don't really love having everything changed. So I'd love it if we could just talk a little bit about, first of all, fundamental principles that we think are really the essentials of regenerative agriculture, and then maybe how that is used in practice to sort of mitigate some of those issues and maximize the positives. I'll just throw it out there. Anybody want to do top 3 guiding principles for you?
I guess I'll
Oh,
go. I think for me that one of the main principles is to be a responsible steward of the land, right? Like having respect for the place that you're working at, having respect for the vineyard, and not just looking at the branch as something that produces a commodity, that it includes the surrounding ecosystems and trying to bring biodiversity in as well. So you're not just managing the vines that are producing fruit, but you're also, if you have creeks in your area, you're managing those and you're trying to introduce new species of birds. If you're, putting up owl boxes and having diverse cover crop species mixed to attract pollinators, it's about being cognizant that your vineyard is not just your vineyard, it's part of the greater ecosystem, and emphasizing that it's holistic, right? So you don't just look at, these are my vineyard blocks, that's what I'm managing. You're looking at the farm as like a whole unit and trying to make sure that you're not causing harm to any of the critters or beings, and try to promote as much biodiversity as possible in an inherent monoculture system, which is not necessarily an easy thing to do. But I think for me, those are kind of the top things to think about.
And I would just add in there, I think what Steve was saying about the people who actually work the land as well. I think they're part of that ecosystem. And I think managing, their well-being is also super important.
hmm
Steve, you were going to say something about your principles?
Okay. Well,
I
yeah,
know
I
you're a
mean,
very principled guy.
I'm principled, but I'd like to break things into bite-sized pieces. So totally echoing Natalie, biodiversity, and there's lots of aspects of that, right? To bio, the beneficial insects, the pollinators that don't have direct impact on us, but as part of our sort of responsibility to the greater ecosystem, migratory animals. So biodiversity is a really big part of it. Like reducing our carbon footprint is a really big part of it. So, that's in sequestering carbon into the soil, coupled with trying to use less fossil fuels in our farming or winemaking. So biodiversity, carbon footprint, social equity is critical part of regenerative agriculture. Um, Conserving in our climate, and this is back to principles and practices, because in our climate, conserving water is super important. Conserving our groundwater resources, and these things kind of tie together, because healthy soils that sequester carbon are also, by definition, going to be more porous due to their organic matter, and so more of our rainfall gets down into the aquifer to recharge the aquifer, and the vines need less water because they have healthier soil. So all these things are tied together. The biodiversity, you use less pesticides because you have more biodiversity. So so it's all kind of, that's the beauty of it, is all interfolds. So you have biodiversity, you have carbon footprint, you have social equity, you have water conservation. Um, Organic farming. Now that's one of the areas that are controversial around, in the grander conversation of regenerative. But to me, organic is a foundational piece of the whole puzzle. To do our farming without needing to rely on synthetic pesticides or fertilizers. Kind of bringing it back to the original belief system of organic, value system of organics, that has sort of, some of it has kind of fallen away a little bit, like the space shuttle coming in, little tiles and stuff fall away. over time as it becomes more and more commodified and corporate, which is not a bad thing because we want to have people be able to get organic food if they do their shopping at Walmart. Everyone deserves organic food, but coming back to some of the original ideals and packing them back on again is, with the overall sort of more holistic concept behind regenerative. So that's kind of what it is to me.
That's awesome. And I think one of the things we've talked about, I know Mike and I have talked about a lot because we don't own our own vineyards, right? So we work with grape growers. And the way that the whole ecosystem of the grape grower winemaker relationship has evolved, at least here in Napa, is that we pay a price for grapes per ton, right? So there's always that tension between the winemaker wanting to have lower yields to have higher quality and the grape grower wanting to have higher yields to have more money, which obviously makes total sense from both sides. And what we've found is that, I think there's no doubt, and the research is there to say that soil health and resistance to pests and disease and drought is definitely improved with regenerative farming practices, but sometimes the yields go down, right? So it's been an interesting thing because at the end of the day, we're all not farming. It would be great if we were just farming these vines and like that was the end game. But we're in it to make wine and sell wine, right? So if we have lower yields and our grape growers aren't making the money that they need and we're not getting enough grapes to make the amount of wine that we need to make this viable, what are the ways that you've seen to kind of help mitigate that or negotiate it or make it pencil, right? Because at the end of the day, that's a really essential part of being sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the main things is front loading your fertility because your transition period is anywhere from 5 to 6 years, and usually there can be a yield dip if like plants are. Let's take a conventional system and we're trying to go regenerative, right? If you change a lot of the farming practices at once, the plants get very stressed and they show water stress and their yields, their vigor usually deteriorates and their yields go down. So what I have found over the years working with different sites in Napa, Sonoma County, et cetera, is slowly making changes in the vineyard, even slower than you want to, because the vines have to adapt while they're being weaned off of conventional pesticides, conventional fertilizers. Like these are, I don't want to be dramatic and use an analogy that's not appropriate, but it's like taking somebody off of prescription drugs that they've been on for a really long time. Like you have to wean off what you've been doing and then at the same time like introduce the changes slowly because I've made this mistake myself. If you try to change all the things and get there too quickly, then your blocks can get overly stressed. And then it's like you took 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and it takes time to recover. So I think especially having learned those lessons myself, the key is moving very slowly during transition and front loading your fertility. So giving your blocks 10 tons to the acre of compost during your transition time, doing fish emulsion or another organic fertigation at key times. And, if you're trying to, like Steve said, conserve water, right? So you're at the same time, we're going to cut off our water because we want to train our vines that have already been established to use less water and be more resilient during climatic extremes. But then we're also going to change the entire fungicide program. And we're also going to switch off of conventional fertilizers and do all organic ones. And then we're going to just stop all cultivation. Like that is a recipe for disaster. And I think that is one of the main reasons why you can see a significant yield decrease is because everybody, I mean, myself included, we all want to get to where we're going faster than the process really allows. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure Steve can elaborate on that because he's seen this over and over again.
Yeah. And it's so interesting also that yield is relative. And so like if you're in a lower co like for example, I remember talking to Pam Strayer about like Franzia's organic farming for like their organic $3 chuck. And and so that was like super low cost, super high yield farming. And she told me they were getting like 13 tons per acre on the organic compared to like 17 tons per acre on the conventional. Here in Napa, where um, we don't crop anything to its maximum potential. Green harvesting is part of quality winemaking. Um, there's lots of opinions on how much to green harvest, when to green harvest, why we're green harvesting, but no one is making quality wine without doing some fruit thinning in Napa or Sonoma. It's just part of quality. You have to balancing the fruit to the vine is part of it, and within that sort of rubric that we're reducing our yields as part of quality, anyways. I really believe that if we follow the steps that Natalie, in almost all cases, you're always going to have exceptions to some super rocky hillside vineyard that was already weak before you took it over. Um, but in general, a normal vineyard, if we take the steps like Natalie said, that's the beautiful thing about all these regenerative principles is that they actually work. Back to Mike's original point about just going back to good farming, is they actually work. And so if we take our steps carefully, like Natalie described, we give the vines a chance to adapt and adjust. There's no reason that to have a yield loss
Hmm.
with high end grape growing. Again, low end grape growing is a little bit of a different situation because if you're just pushing those vines with every new high tech chemical on the market, and some of these new fertilizers and stuff are just ridiculously effective, and the vines are so pumped up that you can't compete with that using natural systems. I would argue that there's no reason to compete. I mean, we have a huge grape glut right now, and people are so focused on acreage, but the conversation also needs to include the fact that yields are way higher in the Central Valley than they were 10, 15 years ago because these new chemicals are so effective, and we don't need that many grapes. So if on the commodity level, if people go to regenerative, it's okay to take a yield loss, and I think prices can come back into balance better. But at the high end, I think we can do it without a yield loss in high end, and we've seen it so many times it just takes time. But it's a false statement that you have to make a trade-off between yield and regenerative because regenerative can produce equivalent yields in a high-end system, no problem.
And Mike, can you speak a little bit to like the human component? How do you, just in terms of like how we have worked with some of our growers to get them there?
Definitely. Yeah, so I've been with Trois since 2022. Jamie's been working with the Muir Hanna Vineyard, the Hanna family, who are actually very cool, direct descendants of the conservationist John Muir. Um, since 2018, I believe you've been working with them. They're a sustainably farmed vineyard before we partnered with them. So I would say that they were already very open-minded to these regenerative principles that we're all talking about. However, I think there was a certain amount of, buy-in that we could only really achieve through doing a trial, which is what we have set out to do. Um, so Michael Hanna does do quite a bit of tilling of the soil, which I'm sure that Natalie and Steve can speak to. There are certain major benefits to tilling soil, and I don't think that regenerative viticulture and tillage are completely mutually exclusive, which I think is um, quite misunderstood in a lot of the current sort of knowledge base of regenerative out there right now. But yeah, I mean, we started having meetings about doing this trial, which occurred in both our um, longest standing Chardonnay block, Old Vine Vintage Chardonnay. We also did a trial in our Cabernet Sauvignon block at Hannah Vineyard. We did one row in each trial, and I'll get into the details in a little bit. But really, I think it was just like Natalie was saying, that slow incremental introduction to permanent cover crop and no tilling, and then looking at the actual impact on the fruit quality and the resulting wine quality, and then we do grower tastings with the Hannah family, and we all have a chance to taste, the results of the trial together. We've seen some pretty dramatic, improvements in the organoleptic quality of the wine and the mid palate and the texture and aromatics. So I think that as far as the human impact goes, yeah, I mean, it's brought us closer. We are, a winery client of theirs. They are our grower. We have collaborated so much more intimately, I would say, on our collective farming of the vineyard, which I think is any kind of viticultural practice that gets us working closer together and gets us into the vineyard more has to be beneficial, which I think we've seen.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Totally agree. And I will just say, I'm very excited. I have show and tell. So everybody who's hanging out, I will share this. Dun, dun, dun. So this is basically what we started with. So this was our full till. And again, till is not evil, till is not bad. We can have tilling in regenerative agriculture, and I think Natalie certainly and Steve will speak to that as well. But the most one of the most difficult things that we had to help kind of navigate and change in the mindset was that this felt clean to our grower, right? He thought this looked really good and really beautiful. And like everything was tidy, everything was perfect. And interestingly enough, we now very happily are able to have this with him at a certain time of year, obviously. And he's actually beginning to see that this is beautiful too, right? And that this carries additional benefits besides just the aesthetic. But I think the aesthetic is important. We have, particularly in a place like Napa, Sonoma, where tourism is a huge thing, right? Tourism is a big deal. I think being able to show people what we're doing and they can actually see it themselves is an important part of regenerative agriculture becoming a more accepted practice and a more standardized practice. I also think I wanted to just circle back because we did have a question in the chat from Anna saying, what are some examples of social equity for regenerative farming? Yes, so much more beautiful. I mean, we all see that, but also I totally get it. And I was wondering, Steve, would you be able to speak to that in your experience?
Yeah, I think that a lot of it has to do with wages. A living wage, paying a living wage. If you're not, how can you call yourself sustainable or regenerative responsible if you're not paying a living wage? And the nice thing about these things is that we have benchmarks. So, like for example, MIT has a calculator you can log on. After this, Google it, the MIT living wage calculator, and you enter your zip code, and it tells you the living wage for your zip code. And so you make sure that you're paying that your lowest paid person is getting a living wage. There's also that so that's fundamental. Things like health, again, this is principles and practices, right? So things like health insurance are going to be different places. If you're talking regenerative in Austria, maybe you don't need to provide health insurance as an employer. In California, you do because it's not we don't have socialized medicine, and so the employers. So as an employer, we provide, for example, 100% health insurance to every single one of our employees, and 50% for all of their family members. And so that's just something that we provide that we think is part of social equity. Um, Opportunities for people to advance themselves. I think that, like part of social equity is that your workplace is people can advance themselves in their workplace. That's sort of a basic right, I guess, that we should be able to advance ourselves as we have opportunities to. So providing opportunities for education. Um, if someone is an immigrant and they want to learn English, providing that so they can um, have a lot more opportunities within our company, or if they choose to leave their next company because they've learned a skill while they've worked here. And just really strong. I mean, for example, vineyards, and this is what I mean by the evolving definition, because when I started working in vineyards, all of the vineyard workers were male. Now we have more genders working in the workplace. We have male, female, non-binary. It should be a safe place for everyone, and that requires a lot of education and policies and enforcement of our policies and safe spaces for people to speak up. And there's a whole lot around that again we that is part of social equity that is not a given in our California history with farm workers. And so that's why, I mean, it's a process moving forward. So I'm not saying that that's some of these things I mentioned aren't necessarily the end all be alls, but they're an attempt at continuing to develop in the social equity portion of the regenerative drive.
Absolutely. And I would say just a tiny little anecdotal piece of proof in the way that it is sustainable. And I vividly remember this going back to 2020, which was obviously very complicated for us in terms of um, fire, quarantine, the world disintegrating, whatever. Um, there were a lot of places that crews just never showed up. They just wouldn't show up because it wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth them risking their lives to come and harvest because there wasn't the sort of benefit. And whenever people ask me about Napa and harvest and things like that, I'm like, please understand that these are incredibly skilled workers, and we're able to have skilled workers because we do have, these are jobs that people can oftentimes support their families on, and they can actually have there are people paying living wages and benefits and all of those things, and it's not a commodity job. It's a very highly skilled job. And trust me, and if you really don't believe me, please go out and spend just 3 hours, not even a whole day, just 3 hours doing any kind of vineyard work, and you'll understand that A, you're slow, and B, you're very, very, very exhausted. It's hard work, but it's very, very, very precise. Um, and for high-end quality winemaking, there's just no other way to do it, which also, I will say, just makes this part of the world a really great place to work on something like regenerative agriculture, because I think we are necessarily in the vineyard already a lot more than some places and in the world. And so, oh, Robert, I just put it in the chat a little bit, 2 comments above for the living wage
At
MIT.
MIT.
Yep. I just
This
put the link up there so you can grab it. We had some questions about the cover crop in the photo, and we did, Mike, you can speak to the fact we worked with Napa RCD, and we also did some sampling in Oregon. I can't remember exactly which university in Oregon does the soil sampling.
So at the sort of outset of the trial, which was in 2023, We did some soil sampling of the site of the trial, the Muir Vineyard, and sent the samples to the Oregon State University Soil Health Lab, just to kind of get a broad overview of, the nutritional composition of our soil, microbial diversity existing in the soil. The specific cover crop that we planted was mostly fescue grasses and wildflowers. So we had blandobrome, Zorro fescue, hard fescue, sheep fescue.
Sorry, I put it in the chat.
Oh, okay, good. So we had a lot of fescues, and Steve actually um, took one of my phone calls because we wanted to collaborate with Steve because he knows his stuff, and he gave us those recommendations as well to plant that cover crop.
Yeah. Are there any things, Natalie, Steve, Mike, cover crop? Oh, this is a great question, actually. This is kind of leading into what I was going to talk about. Cover crops are a concern in water-starved Southern California. Advice.
Mm. It's really tricky on some of these drought years when you don't have enough rain to feed the cover crop. Um, and so we have to work with what you have basically. And so if you have a drought year and you get 3-4 inches of rain in the entire year, then you're going to have a pretty meager cover crop. But our rainfalls are cyclical in California, and there's that Steinbeck, who starts the book saying that California has 7 years of drought and 7 years of rain, and in the years of drought they forget it rained, and in the year of rain they forget that there was drought. And so we could have 7 years where you're not growing much cover crop in Southern California, and then we tend to seed it, because you never really know in California if it's going to be a rainy year or not, and the seed is not that expensive. It really isn't, and we kind of hope for the best. And if you can get a little bit of growth in a drier year, it's better than nothing. And then if you get in our 7 years of rain, and that's your chance to do a lot of soil building, and because that's the thing, and the reason to have these conferences and kind of talk through these with everyone in the SOM community is that farming is a lot of gray area. It's not that black and white. It's people key in on these specific things like, do you do this or do you do that? And it's more of a conversation and working with where you're at, and it's doing the best you can in your site. So in Southern California, we get you plant the seed and we hit the lottery and get 15 inches of rain and get a nice cover crop, then that's awesome. I mean, it's not that dissimilar than being up in Michigan or something like that. And you don't know, you have a short season, and there's a lot of uncertainty there but it might be on the too much rain side of things, and your cover crop gets drowned out or one year. And so again, that's farming, and you just keep trying, basically. The old saying is they did an autopsy on an old farmer, and when they opened him up, he was full of next years.
That's awesome.
I
I think
love
too,
that.
though, I mean, to Natalie's point about long-term planning, we're also looking at, building soil structures that increase rain soak, so that even in theory, if you start now in 5, 10, 15 years, when you're coming around to those cycles, hopefully you've got something that's going to soak more of the smaller rains in, right? So it's not an immediate, to Natalie, to your point, it's not an immediate thing.
Mm-hmm.
It compounds over time
Yeah.
too. Like the benefits of regenerative agriculture. It's not like you wake up one day and there's like a switch. It's basically constantly evolving and constant adapting to your practices, what's working, what's not working. I think your biggest tool as a farmer with regenerative ag, or just being a good farmer in general, is observation. Like keen observation in the vineyard is priceless, because you're out there and you can see like what's working and what's not working. Also, detailed note taking. What did we do 5 years ago? I mean, I might remember a few years from now what we did in the spring and which blocks we spring cultivated and which ones we didn't, but I'm not going to in 6 years, so I'm going to take detailed notes to know. And I think those are the ways that you keep improving year over year, is taking extremely detailed notes about what you did and the observations after, that are correlated, and then constant slight tweaks and adaptability with what you're doing, and getting down to like the sub block level, right? Like we've all farmed, and there's like areas within a block. Okay, this is a weak area. All right, I'm not going to farm this smaller weak area the same as I am the greater 2 acre block. Like I need to isolate this third of an acre. I'm going to focus my energy there. I'm going to do things a little bit differently there. I'm going to water it differently. I'm going to have a little bit different floor cover management, but like writing those things down. And then the whole goal with regenerative agriculture and agriculture in general over time is to bring the vines into balance, right? And to grow a high quality crop. So it's always about adapting and tweaking. And you've never arrived, to Steve's point. It's not like you just wake up and you're like, we're regenerative, we did it. Because I think you have to be slightly nutty to want to be a farmer year in and year out, because every year there's always curveballs, but that's part of it, reacting and making good choices and tweaking along the way.
Yeah, and I think too, in terms of this whole like larger 38,000 foot view of sustainability, I think the community aspect, not just environmentally, but also in moments like this. Like you said, you've taken your copious notes, which is great and helps you, but also if you can share those notes with your neighbor, with somebody down the road, with somebody in another space, and maybe help them, you know, my dad's whole thing is you can't ever be 100% better than anyone, so be 1% better than 100 different people. Um, and I think that, and Steve, if he stole that from you, please do footnote yourself. But I don't think he did. I think that was his. Um, but yeah, I think that's a really important piece too. I think rather than having these silos, right? Whether it's grape grower and vintner, or it's like my vineyard and your vineyard, this whole idea of building community through process, that's bringing back these regenerative processes, and to Steve's point, moving them even further into better practices to avoid some of the previous issues. So we've got all kinds of great questions here. There are a couple of operational ones about biochar and how you manage cover crop in the winter. And we've got about 13 minutes left. I would really love to take a couple of minutes to talk about the question from Prudy, though, about how we value a harvest or a wine and what we actually focus on, because I think this is an aspect of regenerative farming practices and wines that are made with these kinds of practices that we sometimes in our scientific and farming brains forget, that I think this has a really important knock-on value with consumers in the market. If we can find a way to be able to share it with sommeliers, people in the hospitality industry, and all of that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Thoughts?
I don't. That's interesting. That's a good question, Prudy. And I don't. It's interesting as a metric. I don't know how you. I love putting metrics on stuff, and I don't know how you put a metric on story, but wine is about story, right? I mean, it's if you can't separate story from flavor in wine because they're part and parcel. A lot of wines are hard to understand until you hear the story, like Grosvenor or something like that. Is a lot more tasty once you understand who this person is, why they make the wine they make, and how they do it in the historical context, and then the wine becomes much more delicious, right? And so story is super important to to wine, and but then and so I don't know how to put a net metric to it, but I've never really thought about that, Prudy, in terms of, because we talk about tons per acre. We evaluate success in the vineyard based on all these, but it could be quality parameters. It could be, organoleptics, like, Mike was talking about with but we don't think about it in terms of this, the story, other than interestingly, like the fancy vineyards, like a To Kalon or something like that, they think of that, like Andy Beckstoffer thinks of To Kalon as a branded product, and he wants to charge for it. Um, Maybe in this case, especially now that everything being so competitive, if you have a vineyard that that passion from the grower can get communicated through you selling that bottle, it might be the vineyard you stick with rather than the other one that doesn't have the passion. So I don't know. Anyways, this is my stream of consciousness response to that.
It's, if I may, if I could just jump in really quick, it's just coming from after harvest. There's so much pressure economically on the growers to cut back costs, but everybody wants organic, regenerative. Everybody loves these terms, but it doesn't translate to the bottle. It really doesn't. At the end of the day, it doesn't translate to the bottle, and we all understand that. And so that's why I'm saying, I mean, even in Europe, it's hectoliters per hectare. So at least there, they're talking also about how hard you squeeze the grapes. I mean, at least there's a tiny crossover. And I'm just wondering, and I know that there's no answer today, but I've really been thinking about it, is that, we have to think about a whole different way of valuing these vineyards, because I'm going against all these budget talks right now in all these different vineyards, and they're like, okay, price per acre, tons per acre, how do and they just like throw all these other practices that are so successful out the window. And anyway, I don't expect an answer today, but I thought I'd throw it out that we need a new way to express it. And story is a great idea, Steve. It's just that forgive me, but it feels too limiting. It's too play by play. I'm trying to think in a bigger scale, like a language that, anyway, sorry.
Mm.
In the short term, it could be like today, it's probably as simple as whose grapes are sold or not. I mean, that's the crazy thing is if there's now that right now we have less buyers than we have vineyards. So if you don't have a buyer, I mean, cutting costs if you have a buyer, is it's not the time to be cutting costs if you have a buyer. It's the time to be demonstrating your worth to the buyer.
Mike, you were going to say something?
Yeah, so I was just gonna offer. I have a dear friend and colleague who is master of
Is he frozen?
It looks like Jaime might have frozen also.
Yeah, I
Is
a
Jaime
have
lot
frozen
more
to
for
too?
that.
There we go.
Well,
Hey, Mike,
Hey, Mike, yeah, go ahead. Sorry. You got to
Oh,
repeat that whole thing because you froze
oh,
and we
geez,
didn't
I'm so
hear
sorry.
any of it.
Okay,
No, it's okay.
thank
We were
you.
on the edge of our seats here.
I know. I
So,
was like trying to find Casey to send her a note.
yeah. So sorry. I guess that's the internet here at the winery. So yeah, my friend, he's still early on in his research. You can all hear me now.
Yep.
Mhm.
He has basically not been able to really find a huge correlation between regenerative, organic, biodynamic farming and what the consumer is willing to pay, or an increase in willingness to pay for a bottle of, a more expensive bottle of wine, or any really correlation between buying patterns, which I find really interesting. He's still thick in the research, but I will say, from a value perspective, certainly, for Jaime and I, with our trial barrels, we definitely consider those very high value. We are guarding those barrels against the rest of the lot because, of course, it's a trial. So we're
I will take over.
from,
Oh, no, there he is.
sorry, guys,
You're
crazy.
in and out.
Anyway,
No,
yeah.
but I think you're right. But here's the thing. I honestly believe that particularly the way that younger consumers are coming up and what they do care about and what they are looking for. We have different sort of certifications that aren't specifically to do with regenerative farming, right? So we're a certified B Corp, we're certified Napa Green, all that good stuff. And I think regenerative farming is kind of a foundational piece for us that everything else layers on top of. And I think at the end of the day, it's not going to be, to Steve's point, it's not necessarily will it be more value? It's that if you aren't doing it, you're falling off the bottom. I think that, you know, the way the way that legislation is going, the way that environmentalism is going, the way that consumers are going, I think that we're all trying to work towards something that is sustainable in the large aspect of that word. And I think in this day and age and going forward, being sustainable just won't be possible if you're doing, you know, some really nasty environmental farming practices. And the other thing is too, like I said, we're a big tourist place here, right? So if we have these vineyards that people can go walk in and they can go see, and we can actually give them that sort of little tiny bit of education about farming through wine, I think that's actually really helpful because that also informs the way that they may think about other crops. You know, people do pay more for organic food, right? They do. Not everyone, but enough people so that there's an entire industry that's been built up around that. I think certifications are tricky. Tier system is great. That's one of the things that's been put in the chat. But again, and circling back to a previous question, even though we only have a few minutes left, how do you manage the cover crop? One of the big things that we were talking about in our call originally was so many people equate regenerative and no-till, right? And that those things are equal. And I think we have some very strong opinions about that down on our little Brady Bunch here. Yeah. And so how do you manage the cover crop? Do you whack it down? Do you ever till? Do you mow?
It's got to be block specific. You know, that the research and the studies are clear that less cultivation is better than cultivating all the time. However, it's a spectrum, right? Like, I don't find it helpful that regenerative is now synonymous with no-till because let's be frank, no-till does not work at every site. Try to farm heavy clay soil and do no-till, and good luck to you. So I think it's about being really intentional about when you choose to move the soil and why, right? So there's no like, okay, we sow the cover crop in the fall and in the spring, you're going to want to knock it down before frost season if that's you know, a concern at your site. So you're going to want to either mow it or graze it. Sheep grazing is a great option. You might want to run a tine cultivator. You might want to run a disc. You might want to run a spader. You know, are you looking to incorporate with your green manure and get your legumes in there to get your nitrogen boost? I mean, it really depends on how I like to think about this is what are my goals for this block or sub block, and then like work backwards. Like, what are my top 3 goals for this specific area of my vineyard? And then reverse engineer it with what I'm doing for floor, for, you know, ground floor maintenance or management. I mean, so yes, I have a very strong opinion about cultivation is not necessarily a bad thing. Is it great to cultivate your soil all the time and turn it into a dust bowl so that there's absolutely no microbiology in the top foot of your soil? Absolutely not. But it's not one or the other. There's a lot of things in between. And I think if we're being really thoughtful about how we're doing things, which as farmers, that's what we do, cultivation is not always bad and it can achieve desired results in specific situations.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Can somebody comment on biochar really quickly? Because we did have a question about that.
Steve, you want to take that one?
Um, so, I mean, to me, that's an example of one of the plethora of like new interesting tools that we have at our disposal now is for, you know, organic farming basically, or just soil building. I don't have any personal experience using biochar. I'm kind of old school and I'm still stuck on cover crops and compost. But I just appreciate that it's we get, more, it's, our toolbox is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger with the different tools. I mean, my understanding on the idea of biochar is that you're creating a little raft in the soil. It's kind of sort of like making a reef off the coast of Florida. You put something down there and then in a sandy area, and then stuff can start growing on it. And it's a pretty neat concept. And yeah, but I personally, again, I'm just old school, and I like compost and cover crops, mainly cover crops. Just to follow up on the cover crops though, because cover crops they're such a big deal for wine quality. I mean, forget any environment. If you just take the whole environmental benefit, which is just massive, and put it to the side and just go wine quality. Cover crops are basically the one tool we have to manage seasonal variation in rainfall, which is just foundational to wine quality. So, so what cover crops we plant so we can balance the soil water holding capacity. So more competitive cover crops, less, and this is where no-till is really effective when you have excessive vigor to draw the vines down. Soil building cover crops in weaker soils. Um, the late season stress that you get in the clay soils when you start cracking, like Natalie was talking about, and trying to get a cover crop with fibrous root system that breaks that clay up, and then we incorporate it and kind of seal the moisture in so that the soil doesn't crack as much. I mean, it's unbelievable how much control we can have over improving our wine quality by using the tool of cover crops. Without the cover crop, you're just at the mercy of the season. You have no ability to leave the cover crop longer in the spring, to use more of the extra rain we got in a super rainy year, or to whack the cover crop down to like Robert said, early to keep our water in the soil so you can adapt to the spring. So the cover crops are just super. It's just there's the beauty of all these regenerative farming concepts is there isn't a single one of them that doesn't fall back into wine quality. You're not, that's what I was trying to make earlier, that there's no compromise on yields. There's no compromise on quality. Social equity, having really loyal employees that are highly trained, that care because they're well compensated. You can just do a better job tending the grapes. I mean, you can't find an example where wine quality isn't improved by all these practices.
Absolutely. I know we're over time, Casey, by 1 minute. I just wanted to, and there are some other questions in the about where to buy seed for cover crops and stuff like that. I will talk with our panel. We'll see if we can get some emails sent out to everybody who attended today, just in case you do have any follow-up questions. But yeah, I mean, I just really thank you guys so much for being here. I think this is a great next step. I don't think any of the, it's always about progress, not perfection, right? So this is one more little drop in this hopefully larger and larger bucket. If you could leave everybody who's here with one final brief thought, panelists, what would it be? Yep, go Steve.
The other great thing about all these regenerative techniques is they help us navigate global warming. So we don't want to feel like we can't keep making great wine going forward. We can keep making great wine going forward.
Awesome.
I would say a phrase that I've been really loving lately is how you do anything is how you do everything. So I think just, spending more time in the vineyard, spending time with the workers, spending time with the managers, spending time with cellar workers. Jaime and I are super involved with our winery, our vineyard partners, and all of that is just, really improving our wine quality, our relationships with everyone, our sales. I think it just has a ripple effect on our, Napa Valley community and our broader community. So I think regenerative is just a great, vehicle for a lot of that work.
I guess I just want to emphasize that regenerative is not new. It's actually the old traditional way that was practiced by indigenous people for thousands of years farming. So it's not like it's trendy, it's hip, it's coming around, but a lot of these practices, you look in really old, ancient, like 1800s agricultural texts. Like a lot of these things are there. So it's great that they're being rediscovered, but when people say, "Oh, well, it's woo woo," or it's, whatever, it's hip, it's trendy, but it's actually just it's traditional agriculture. Like that's what it actually is. And so I think, especially with consumers, like reminding them of that, like getting back to nature, that's what we're trying to do. That's how we used to do things. I think makes it feel more approachable. So I think
Awesome.
that's
And I would
important to
just
keep in
say,
mind.
yeah, I would just say to add to Natalie's thing, it's never a bad idea to learn about whose land you're on and to have a little deep dive into maybe some of the ways and people that are the reason we're even here today. So thank you everyone for being here. Thank you so much to the panelists for being awesome always. And thank you, Casey, for helping make this happen. We're really excited we finally got it done.
Yes, it was a really beautiful and interesting conversation. So thank you to the panel for sharing all of their knowledge with our community. This will be available on our website probably by the end of the week. So if you have colleagues that you'd like to share this with that might find it beneficial, we'll send out a link later this week when it's live available to watch the recording. And we look forward to seeing you all at the next one.